Hi everyone. I want to welcome you here today. Glad that you joined me. This is the second half of our Movers and Shakers program. If you didn't see the first half, it is available on our YouTube station channel. You can see that same place you saw this, and it's just called Movers and Shakers Part 1. I think that's what it is. In that one, we discussed Joseph Macaulay Lowe and C.C. Hagemeyer. C.C. Hagemeyer was from Butler, Lowe was from Collinsville. And today, let me get my screen shared here with you. Wrong thing there. Let's see if I can do that. There. Okay. And I'm going to start it here, this slide. Okay, so while that's coming up, I just want to, again, thank you for coming today. And just remind you that at the end of this program, we will have discussed 4 movers and shakers from Pendleton County. They are Christian C. Hagemeyer, Joseph M. Lowe, Samuel Hauser, and Luther Kennett. Today we're going to cover Hauser and Kennett. These men were both cousins and were both from Falmouth. Hauser's mother and Kennett's father were siblings. Might be a good time to also tell you that Luther Kennett and Joseph M. Lowe were also relatives. Luther's mother, and Joseph M. Lowe's mother were first cousins. So we're going to start with Samuel T. Hauser. He, as I said, was born in Falmouth. He was born on January the 10th, 1833, the son of Samuel T. and Mary Ann Kenneth Hauser. Sam Sr. was an attorney in Pendleton County, and Mary Ann was the daughter of William and Euphemie Graves Kennett. The Hauser family lived in this house. It's where the Falmouth Fire Department is now. And of course, the house is long gone. Young Sam received his education in the public schools in Falmouth. Later, his education was overseen by his father and a cousin who both had graduated from Yale University. Hauser's obituary indicates he was also educated in civil engineering, but it didn't go into any detail as to where that happened. When he was 19, he went to work for the Kentucky Central Railroad. Samuel made his way to Missouri in 1854, where he was employed as an assistant engineer for the Missouri Pacific and the Northern Pacific Railways. He worked his way up to chief engineer on the Lexington and Sedalia branch of the Northern Pacific Railroad. In 1862, he headed to Montana. So I've just covered his early life. We are going to be talking about his exploration. He went on a few really cool trips. Banking and business, politics, hydroelectric power. I'm going to talk about who he married and his later years as well. This is a picture taken of him in the mid-1860s, probably around 1863. On April the 10th of 1863, there was an agreement signed that kind of set out the rules of play, if you will, for Hauser's first expedition to what we now call Yellowstone National Park. Initially, 25 men signed on to go to Yellowstone, but several of them ran into hostile Indians on their way to the meetup place. They were to meet near Bannock, Montana, at a place called Rattlesnake Creek. But those 10 never made it. The other 15 went on without them. And Hauser, of course, was one of those 15. The reason they were heading to Yellowstone was they were hoping to find some land somewhere, either along the Yellowstone River or the Bighorn River, that was rich in placer gold. Now, there are 2 types of gold deposits. In case you don't know what placer is, I'm going to kind of try to explain it. There's lode and there's placer. That's the 2 types of gold deposits that there is. Typically, lode deposits are embedded in rocks and minerals. And when these lodes are disintegrated by just natural erosion, water running over the rocks will cause that. Then placer gold is what what results. It's just the deposit of loose, so what looks like surface dirt or silt that contains gold. So anyway, they headed off on this expedition, and for the first 400 miles, they had no problem. They traveled with ease. It's the last 1,200 that presented the problem. This 1,200-mile stretch took them completely around what we today call Yellowstone National Park. That 1,200-mile trek was made without shelter, without a change of clothing, and with not enough to eat. Here's how the problem all developed. They were about 80 miles east of the mouth of the Shields River when they ran into a party of 30 Crow Indians. These Indians came into their camp and pretended to be friendly, then began stealing from the men. So the men told them they had to leave. So while they were in camp, a few nights later, I believe it was the evening of May the 12th, they were attacked by Indians. One man was killed in this attack. One was severely wounded, and he killed himself the next morning. Several others had lesser wounds, but were still wounded. Hauser was one of those men. All of the men on this expedition were considered experienced on the trail and with a thorough knowledge of Indians and Indian warfare. They reported that their party was outnumbered by the Indians as much as 5 to 1. At this point, they decided to just pack up a little food and leave Indian country, get out of Indian country the next morning. So they followed a wagon trail along the Sweet River to do this. And in doing that, they ran into 16 really difficult days. They had very little grass to eat for the horses to eat. They had a hard time finding game for them to eat. And of course, they only brought a small ration of bread with them. They were constantly on the watch for another Indian attack. And eventually, the expedition did come upon a wagon train, and they joined with them for a few days, making it back to Bannock on June the 22nd. Eventually, this trip paid off for Hauser. Within a few years, he owned 6 silver mines and several coal mines. In time, he would also own several silver smelters, including the territory's first smelter located in Argenta. Then in 1869, Nathaniel P. Langford began to prepare for another expedition to the Yellowstone region for the following year of 1870. His purpose in going was to, if at all possible, improve on a map of the region done earlier by Walter de Lacy. By August of 1870, he had a plan together to explore the region. And according to his account, Samuel Hauser reported to him that if he would find James Stewart, and there was one other man who went with them on the 1863 expedition that was not named in my research source, but if he found those 2 men, that Hauser would be willing to join him, even though they'd been hearing rumors of hostile Indians in the area. So at that time, there were 8 men who were willing to make the trip. Stewart responded that 8 men were not enough, and that the bare minimum they needed was 15. But he said, I'll just go anyway. Spirit of adventure, I guess, right? Henry Washburn was the Surveyor General of the Montana Territory. So he wrote to Lieutenant Gustavus Doane, who was stationed at Fort Ellis, and instructed him to, along with Hauser, contact a general by the last name of Hitchcock at St. Paul and request an escort. So they did, and they did get an escort, and Lieutenant Doane was in charge of that escort. Washburn was chosen as the commander of the expedition. The Doane party departed Helena, Montana Territory on August the 17th. And so this is kind of a map, shows both of the, it's from 1871. So I couldn't find a map that outlined the 1863 Bighorn Expedition, which is what that was called. In 1870, it was the Washburn Langford-Doane Expedition. but this map is from 1871, so I think it's probably pretty accurate as far as what they did in 1870. Anyway, in his diary, Hauser reported, and I quote him, "Considerable bother getting off. Started at 1 p.m. 3 packs off within 300 yards, sent back for a second pack." Then he has a dash and it says left packers. He stated that the main party left about 4 in the afternoon. So they started at 1, they didn't get out till 4. The next day they ran into snow, and by the 23rd, and yes, this is August, so the 18th of August they had snow, and the 23rd it had turned to rain. So they had some really nasty weather right off the bat. On September the 9th, the group was busy moving fallen timbers, and they failed to miss Truman Everts. When they did miss him, it was too late, so they started the next day to search for him. Hauser was part of the search party. While searching, he and his partner almost got lost. They never did find Everts, and Hauser was quoted in the press as saying that he believed Everts was killed by horse thieves in the area. However, Everts showed up about 2.5 months later after having gone missing. Just in case you're curious, he just got lost, and he spent 2.5 months getting back to where he started. So that was the end of that expedition. Here we have Samuel Hauser's wife. He married her in 1871. She was Ellen Farrar. Her first husband was his cousin, James White Kennett. The Kennetts were divorced, and they had 2 children, Harry and Anne. Then Samuel and Ellen Farrar Kennett were married in St. Louis, and after their marriage, she joined him in Montana Territory. And they had 2 children, Ellen and Samuel Thomas Hauser III. In 1865, Hauser joined with Nathaniel Langford. If you remember Nathaniel Langford, that was the expedition of 1870, gentlemen. So they already knew each other when they went on that expedition, but through the banking. But in 1865, they joined together to establish a bank in Virginia City. This was the first bank that Hauser was involved in establishing. The following year, he established the First National Bank of Helena. Later, he also opened banks in Fort Benton, Missoula, and Butte. Hauser oversaw the building and expansion of railroads in Montana Territory as well. He also acquired large real estate holdings throughout the territory and was a rancher during this time. Hauser was a Democrat and became the first territorial resident to be appointed governor of Montana. He was the 7th governor of the territory, but he was actually the first that lived there. There have been 6 non-residents, but Hauser's appointment was made by President Grover Cleveland on July the 3rd, 1885, and he took the oath of office about 10 days later, 11 days later, July 14th. During his time in office, his business interests took up much of his time, and his personal secretary was assigned many of his duties. So as governor, he was an advocate of free silver. This is going to take you back to school. Don't know if you remember what free silver was, but don't worry, I've got a reminder for you. It was just an economic policy of the late 19th century Americans. People who favored free silver were in favor of unlimited coinage of silver made into money on demand, as opposed to a strict adherence to the more carefully fixed money supply of a gold standard. Okay. So it was just silver coins as opposed to money backed by gold. Hauser also favored removing the Indians to reservations, and he vetoed the establishment of a territorial insane asylum. To appease cattle interests in the territory, Hauser appointed a territorial veterinary surgeon. It was easy for me to say, wasn't it? He resigned the governorship in December of 1886, so he spent about a year and a half in office before he resigned. His last day was February 7th, 1887, and his reason was he needed to devote more time to his business ventures. This picture was taken of him probably around the time that he was leaving office or going into office somewhere in the 1885, 1887 era. In 1893, he suffered many financial setbacks due to the Panic of 1893, and he was nearly ruined financially. In 1894, he decided to recoup some of his losses by forming the Missouri River Power Company. He got the approval of Congress to build a dam. Earlier, he had financed a dam about 18 miles upstream of the the Missouri River. Sorry about that. And it was known as the Canyon Ferry Dam. Hauser was interested in harnessing hydroelectricity, and he wanted to harness this type of electricity so that he could use it in his mines and his silver smelters. By 1905, the dam construction began on the Missouri River. The Hauser Dam, as it was named, was a steel dam built on masonry footings on top of gravel, with the ends of the dam anchored in bedrock on both sides of the river. The total cost of the dam at that time was $1.5 million. It was declared operational in February of 1907, so it took them a little more than a couple years to build. And about 14 months later, in April of 1908, it failed. Water pressure was undermined the masonry footings. The first indication of a problem was when silt began running out from under the dam's base near the powerhouse. Everyone was working was safely evacuated before it gave way, and towns downstream were warned and were able to get evacuated as well. The damage was estimated at $1 million. A second dam was constructed, and it opened in 1911. The top picture is of the dam as it broke, or after it broke. So you can see how it buckled. And the bottom one is of the second dam built in, opened up in 1911. Samuel Hauser died on November the 10th at his home in Helena, Montana, at the age of 81. He had not been in good health for several years. Among the firsts attributed to him are the establishing of the first bank in Montana. He was the first territorial resident to become governor of the territory of Montana. He operated and owned the first smelter in Montana, the first silver mill in Montana as well, and he had the first high-power transmission line, or electric pole in simple terms, in the world was on his property. So in business ventures, he was certainly a visionary. He was willing to see and try what no man before him, or at least very few before him, had even endeavored. His sense of adventure led the way. And thanks to him, you know, we've got electric, right? Here, that's going to conclude Samuel T. Hauser. Pretty adventurous for a guy from Falmouth, right? We're moving on now to Luther Kennett. Luther was born in Falmouth on the 15th of March, 1807. As I've already said, his parents were Press Graves and Margaret Porter Kennett. He attended the Pendleton Academy until he was 15, and then he became employed as a clerk in the circuit courts of both Pendleton and Campbell counties. It was at this time that he began reading and studying law with the intent of becoming a lawyer. So we're going to talk about his early and late life, his move to Missouri, his political life, his role in St. Louis during the cholera epidemic, his involvement with railroads, and in the U.S. House of Representatives. And this is a picture of him. It's the only picture I was ever able to find. It was taken in 1876. It's toward the latter years of his life. It was a picture when he was in the Senate, but I did want you to get an idea of what he did look like. He, let's see. I'm going to go on to the next picture. He moved to Missouri in 1825 at the age of 18. He got a job as a clerk in a store and was hoping to continue his law studies, but that didn't happen. He eventually moved to Farmington, Missouri, and clerked with a Captain James White and becoming a partner in White's business. This partnership lasted 15 years. You can see how big the counties were in Missouri at that time. So it was pretty much just really getting started in terms of settlement. And this map is from 1825. And here is, the Mississippi River coming down. So here is Missouri. Lots of big counties here, especially in the bottom half and the top section there. Kennett married twice. The first time he married in 1832, he married Martha Boyce. She and a child that was born in 1835 both died in 1835. It is quite possible she died in childbirth or as a result of it. The death of his wife left him with a 2-year-old daughter. He then married again in 1842. This time he married Agnes Ada Kennett, who was a cousin, and they became the parents of 7 sons. In between his marriages, he was elected city alderman of St. Louis, and this was the beginning of his foray, if you want, into politics. He resigned his position as alderman in 1846 to go on a tour of Europe. But by 1849, he returned and was once again active in St. Louis's civic matters. Cholera swept the city, and the city was besieged by a great fire during 1849. They both occurred at the same time. The fire was predominantly along the river, but it did make its way toward the downtown area. And there are some pretty awesome and incredible stories of what they did to try to save buildings in the downtown area at the time. So with the cholera epidemic, Kennett was selected to be on a committee of 12, which was known as the Committee of Public Health. This was a subset of the Board of Aldermen. The group was charged with getting the epidemic under control. Before they would be able to do that, 1 in 11, or over 8,000 St. Louisans would die from cholera. This figure only includes the people who lived in the city and were buried in the city. So if you were buried on the outskirts of the city, you weren't included in that number. So it's quite likely the number is even higher than that. The reason this committee was appointed was because the city just couldn't handle the epidemic. And the voters were demanding their jobs. So they pretty much handed it over the entire running of the city to this committee. The city was growing. They had a population of 75,000 at the time, and there were more people coming in every day. The city had no sewer system, which allowed for bacterial infection to breed in water, and those who became infected with cholera often died within a day. At this time in history, however, they didn't understand the cause of cholera. Seemingly random things were tried to bring it under control, and this picture here kind of points that out. It's, let's see, it was published by order of the Sanitary Committee under the sanction of the Medical Council. Be temperate in eating and drinking. Avoid raw vegetables and unripe fruit. Abstain from cold water when heated, and above all, from ardent spirits. So, they're kind of all over the board. Cold water, if you're hot, don't drink cold water because that could cause it. Maybe you're eating raw vegetables, that's causing it. Unripe fruit, alcohol. They really didn't know. They're just all over the board there. So I'm going to show you next. The next slide is the number of burials for one day in St. Louis. There were 92 internments that day, and 58 of them were cholera related. And this is on a Sunday. And again, as I said earlier, the statistics were only for those within the city limits. So it lists the cemeteries and how many were buried total, and then how many from cholera. The Board of Aldermen had passed some weak public health measures in an effort to save their jobs. So this is about the time that they decided to turn everything over then to the 12-man delegation. When this committee of 12 came in to control the problem, the first thing they did was they just put their power to use. They organized the city into 3 or 4 block sub-districts. They appointed inspectors from the residents in each district to see that their recommendations were carried out. More than 140 ward inspectors were appointed to patrol neighborhoods every day. They were to also aid the sick and enforce the committee's new sanitation ordinances. They ordered the citizens to clean and disinfect their properties under threat of stiff fines. They contracted for slop carts to haul waste away, converted schools into hospitals that operated at public expense, employed drivers to take the sick to hospitals and to carry the dead to burial, maintained free drug dispensaries, supplied clean water to the poor, and established a quarantine for steamboats that were approaching the city. And they moved very quickly to put these in place. It was just like dominoes falling. They really just one thing after another, and they did this. Without realizing its full importance, the committee helped stop the spread of this disease by isolating their victims in temporary ward hospitals away from the rest of the community. They were taken to these hospitals because it was much easier for doctors and nurses to care for them if they were all together, rather than the doctors and nurses going from house to house. But inadvertently, it also isolated these people, which really helped to get a handle on what was going on. Kennett was the only man of the 12-man bipartisan committee that benefited from his service. He emerged from this as the city's most popular leader. The performance of the committee led to a movement to make medical services available to the poor. And shortly after that, the Sisters of Charity volunteered to staff a temporary hospital. An orphans committee was organized for each ward of the city. By July the 5th, committeemen were named to collect and distribute contributions for children made destitute by the prevailing epidemic. So they also had some social programs involved, as well as just eradicating the illness. During Luther Kennett's, of course, this led him to be able to be elected as the mayor of St. Louis. And during his time, he did make some reforms. St. Louis constructed its first sewer main during his term. They instituted weekly garbage pickup. They began taking steps toward ensuring clean water and the clean distribution of that water as well. Organized their police and fire departments, and they established a city health department, which was started in 1852. Kennett was the mayor from 1850 to 1853. In October of 1849, a national railroad convention took place at St. Louis. From this convention, the Pacific Railroad was conceived. Luther Kennett had served on the committee, which was made up of 25 people that brought this convention to town, and he was also a delegate to the convention. The Pacific reached Franklin, which was later renamed the town of Franklin, which was later renamed Pacific. It was 39 miles from St. Louis, and the Pacific reached it on July the 19th, 1853. By this time, Kennett was the vice president of the railroad and was still the mayor of St. Louis. He delivered the address for the occasion, and during the same year, he was elected president of the Iron Mountain Railroad. So he served on the board of 2 different railroads while he was the mayor of St. Louis. Luther Kennett was elected to the House of Representatives in 1854. This picture shows what the House of Representatives would have looked like at that time, because this chamber was used from 1819 to 1857. So he served from 55 to 57. So his voting record is among the worst of all U.S. representatives from that era. From December of 1855 to March of 1857, he missed 277 of 729 roll call votes, which is 38% of the votes. He just didn't show up for them. This is much worse than the median of 25.3% among the lifetime representatives serving in March of 1857. Why would he miss so much? He was in poor health. He only served out the 1 term, and then he retired to his home, Fairview, in St. Louis County, Missouri. In 1869, so about 12 years later, the Kennetts sold their home and they moved to Paris, France, in hopes that the climate there would be better suited to Luther Kennett's health. He died in Paris, France on the 12th of April in 1873. He was returned back to St. Louis, where he is buried. Through his political career, his volunteer efforts, and his organizational skills, he brought about changes in St. Louis that benefited that community financially. It also improved the health and well-being of its citizens. Many of his social programs are programs that we all still embrace. So he had a long-standing impact there. In summing up, both of these men, in their own way, made an amazing contribution to their world and to the time in which they lived. Much of their work is still evidenced today. We enjoy electricity in our homes, and we can look out our window and see the electric pole, right? The Hauser Dam is still there. We enjoy the national park, Yellowstone. We appreciate having garbage collection. So a lot of their things are still around. Programs that they embraced are still around. Next time that you come in contact with one of those, think about Sam Hauser or Luther Kennett. Isn't it amazing to see the impact Pendleton Countyans have had on our community and on our state and even on our country? Thank you for joining me today. And remember, if you didn't see the first half of this presentation, it's still available on the library's YouTube channel. Please feel free to share this with your friends. We have 4 pretty spectacular men who went on to do great things. 3 of them outside of the county, and 1 moved here, and really it was a boon to our economy and really helped people in our area. So we have something there to be proud of. Thank you very much again for attending this program with me today, and I hope to see you next month when we do a community tour. See you later. Bye-bye.